What is shaking, knife nerds? Today we are taking a look at the CKF MKAD META. So this knife, I believe it was a 2020 release, and it was in their MKAD line of knives, which is CKF's idea of a slightly more budget version of a CKF knife. Normally, CKF knives typically run between 370 and on up to their higher end stuff at $700. And then of course they do their custom one-offs, which are really super expensive. But these run in at about $300 retail, and all of the knives in the MKAD line have been a little on the cheaper side for a CKF, but still an expensive knife for most people, for all intents and purposes. $300 is nothing to laugh at when you're purchasing a pocket knife for the average person. Notwithstanding your knife collectors that have been in this for a long time and are out there buying high-end customs and things like that, to them this is a cheap knife, but to most people this is a pretty expensive knife. That being said, let me get a few specs out of the way. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but it does have a 3.5 inch blade and Bowler M390, and it is a overall length 8.2 inches, and the weight is, hold on, let me scroll down here, my bad, the weight is 3.49 ounces. Okay, so it's a pretty light knife actually. Yeah, they did pretty extensive milling internally on this knife, which is pretty nice, and it's something you don't typically see, a lot on $300 knives. So that's a big plus. There is some pretty extensive milling in here, and the milling is very well done inside. So this is meant to be a sort of a simplistic design knife that is kind of your everyday carry knife for CKF. But of course, they're CKF, so they're still going to make it have some pretty nice looking features, such as the, beautiful geared backspacer and the built-in lanyard loop that is built into the backspacer is pretty nice, pretty good feature there. And other than that, it's really just a pretty plain Jane slab side titanium frame lock flipper on bearings. It is fully contoured. It's not a flat design, so nice contouring and nice 45-degree chamfers all around there. And some interesting chamfers here to give it a little bit more accent. And yeah, and then of course the pocket clip, we'll call it pretty plain Jane, but still a milled pocket clip. Plenty of room in there to get over really wide pockets with that. I will say that this pocket clip is awfully long and pretty big for this little slim knife. So that's one thing we'll discuss. First, I want to kind of get some pros out of the way, because there's quite a lot to like about this knife. Of course, high quality materials, M390, 6A4 LV titanium, and good bearing, ceramic bearings, ceramic detent, internal pockets, and milled pocket clip, and good backspacer. These are all pretty good things for the price range of $300. You can of course get knives that have all of those features for a little bit cheaper these days. So it's almost competitive in that price range. I would say, brands like Best Tech and you can get knives with all of these specs for $200 to $240. So, close, but not quite competing with those companies. Still a little bit more expensive than some of those brands. That being said, some other positives, pretty good ergos. This is a nice size of handle here. It fits really good in my hand. It does have a thumb ramp with completely non-functional jumping there. The jumping is purely aesthetic. And it does feel pretty good in hand. It's nice ergonomically. It's made to fit the hand and give you a place to rest your thumb. And I really, really like this blade shape. Just a whole stinking lot of belly going on here. I mean, this whole blade is practically belly. So it's a really, really slicey grind. It comes up to a pretty high, almost flat grind. And I mean, it is stupid, stupid, stupid thin behind the edge. Impressively thin behind the edge. I have not sharpened this because I'm not going to keep this knife. I'm going to sell it. But it is very, very thin behind the edge and a very effective slicer. And so those are some pros. Now, barring the good looks of the knife and the, good materials and relatively good design, feature, and function here, it's a pretty good looking knife to me. The pocket clip feels a little out of place just because it's so big on this knife. I mean, you're talking, this thing takes up over half of the knife in length. And yeah, just a whole lot of pocket clip going on there. However, it does ride pretty deep. I mean, you can see where it stops right there, and you're only going to be having that, half an inch or so of the knife sticking out of your pocket. But the pocket clip is one of the major flaws on this knife, because they terminated the pocket clip directly in front of this lock bar relief cut. And that's just a big no-no. When you go to slide this out of your pocket and you're pulling up and your pocket lip is sliding down, it's smooth all the way up until here. And then since you have that little lip on the top of your pocket where the seam is, that's going to get pinched between that cutout and that the ramp on the lock bar. And it's not a smooth transition. You'll feel it stop and snag, and then you have to put extra effort into it to pull that off of your pocket. Now, some people might see that as a pro because it's better retention, and you're definitely not going to lose the knife because it's actually kind of difficult to get out of your pocket. I personally don't like that. I want the knife to go in and out of pocket easy and have good retention at the same time. So the pocket clip is a bit of a failure here. The other thing that's wrong with this pocket clip is the placement. Now, they literally put this directly on top of the lock bar. So, and it's a relatively slim knife. So when you go to flip it, your fingers are naturally going to want to rest on that pocket clip because it's so big. And if you squeeze on it, you're going to put pressure down on the lock bar and make it harder to open this knife. So you never ever want to terminate a pocket clip over the top of a lock bar. That's a total fail to me. Complete design oversight right there, and very bad juju. No bueno there. I mean, they could have canted this up and terminated it here on the frame, and it would have been perfectly fine. In fact, it actually looks kind of funny at this angle. It looks more like it should have gone up here. In fact, I think they would have done better if they had a pocket clip that was a little bit curved and shaped like the handle here and came up and terminated up here. they would have been way better off than just putting this straight stick of a pocket clip on here that terminates right on the lock bar, right in the most inconvenient place possible, right in front of the lock bar relief cut. I mean, this should be, you know, a given at this point in the game. You know, this is something that knife guys have complained about for years. You know, you don't terminate the pocket clip there with the lock bar relief, and you don't put the lock bar resting on the lock, or you don't put the pocket clip resting on the lock bar. That should be a no-brainer at this point in the game. I mean, it's just a total oversight. And so there's that. And then the second major flaw with this knife is the flipper tab. This is just hot garbage. I'm sorry. There's no nice way to put this. This is a total fail. Look how tiny that thing is. Okay? You can't, there's not, look, this is, I don't have huge hands. I've got normal size, you know, hands for a 150-pound guy. And I mean, just gone. There's no flipper tab there. As soon as I touch it, that thing just evaporates. It's gone. There's no flipper tab there. And this is a flipper only knife. So you have one method of deployment, and the method of deployment freaking sucks. So, you know, I don't know if CKF prototypes knives. It seems to me like this is something that if you built a prototype of this knife, this is something that you would catch and go, okay, maybe this flipper tab is not quite working. Maybe we need to add a little extra meat to the flipper tab so people don't slip off the flipper tab and, you know, bruise up their finger because there's not enough flipper tab there to grab a hold of. And, you know, CKF is kind of notorious for trying to do these super low profile flipper tabs. And I just don't understand the need to do that. So, you know, you don't want a massive honking thing sticking way out here, but you also want something that you can comfortably get a hold of and deploy the blade. And this just isn't that. Now, it looks and appears that I have no problem at all flipping this knife, right? It's pretty good. I mean, I'm grabbing a hold of it, I'm flipping the blade out, and it's drop shutty. Yeah, that's a pretty decent action, really. So why am I complaining so much about this flipper tab? Well, because I tuned the living crap out of this knife to fix the massive flaw of having that terribly stupid low profile flipper tab. Okay, so this came out of the box with an incredibly stiff detent. Okay, you can't pair a really hard detent with a miniature, almost minuscule, not even existing flipper tab. It just doesn't work. And then to top that off, you've also got the problem with your fingers putting pressure on the lock bar back here. And I was like, literally, as soon as I took it out of the box, the first thing I did was go, you know, and I'm trying to flip this knife and I can't freaking flip the knife. And I'm like, okay, well, obviously lock bar pressure is a problem. So I held it carefully. And then, you know, I still couldn't really get it. I had to like stick my finger in here in this little gap and then light switch it to get it to flip. And I'm like, man, that is just awful. There's no way I'm going to be able to live with that at all. So I had to tune the lock bar. I was able to tune this lock bar successfully without creating any lock play. No problems. It's pretty solid lockup still. As you can see, it's still relatively pretty good and deep there, you know, at least 25-35%. So what I did was I took the lock bar insert out and relieved the lock bar tension. I did it once, I tested it, it was still a little too stiff. I did it again. Now we're talking about moving the lock bar literally like a millimeter, if that. Okay, very little adjustment. So it's not a bit of adjustment that I had to do, but I'm kind of the exception to the rule, where I'm a consumer who is not scared to get in there and tinker with a knife to make it work right. Your average knife guy is going to get this $300 knife and he can't open it, and he's going to be like, what the hell is this? I'm returning this garbage, because he's not going to be able to comfortably deploy that blade and have something that's has an enjoyable action. So the lock bar was just way too stiff for this little tiny little low profile flipper tab. And even with the action tuned way better now than it came from the factory, this flipper tab is still way too low profile. It's not a good flipper tab at all. And if they had prototyped the knife, they probably would have caught that and added some meat to it or done something else. They put some jimping out here on the front of it, and I'm like, what's the point of that? You can't even, there's no jimping to get to. You can't get to it. And then on top of that, the jimping is completely non-functional anyway. It's purely just some lines there. There's no meat, there's no grip to that at all. There's no texture at all there. It's just totally smooth, polished jimping on the flipper tab for no reason. For aesthetics, I guess. It's not functional. None whatsoever. So this flipper tab was a complete fail. I fixed this knife because I would feel bad selling this knife to somebody and the action isn't enjoyable at all. I've got it to a point where I feel comfortable now selling this knife to somebody and they're going to be like, yeah, this is a good action. I like it. It's smooth. It's drop shutty. It's, easy to deploy and still pretty snappy. It's not like I can fail it. I just took out enough tension to where, there wasn't way too much tension on the lock bar, which CKF is just notorious for just way over dialing the lock bar. And I've heard other people say, oh man, CKF has weak detents. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I've had like 20 of these things, maybe even 25, and they all got super hard detents. Sometimes you'll get a CKF that's dialed just right, but most of them generally come out of the box really over stiff. And that's been my experience with the brand personally. Now, I'm not to say that I'm bashing on CKF. I absolutely love CKF. Don't get me wrong. I keep coming back for more CKF because they put out some pretty sick designs. They collaborate with some of the best designers in the world, and their production is relatively quality. With the exception that just these little things that get past their quality control sometimes that are really annoying. Like, it's like, how did that get through the assembly line? How did that make it out onto the street? Why would you try to put out this $300, $450 knife and that it sucks and you only made 300 of them and you can't replace it because, you only made 300 of them. So the customer's just going to hate the knife and not be able to do anything about it because you can't replace it, because you're a small batch maker. If you're going to be a small batch maker that does batches of 300 knives at a time, you better make damn good and sure all 300 of those knives that hit the streets are freaking perfect. They better be dialed in, for $450, they better be perfect. They better be dialed in with good action, good ergos, good blade centering, all those things that you would expect in a $450 knife. They better have that. And in my experience, CKF fails on that front quite often. Okay, I've had some pretty bad quality control issues from CKF quite a few times. And they have good customer service in some aspect. Like when I had what was that I had recently, the I can't remember the name. The most recent CKF that I had that I did a review of here and they sent me the wrong card. Well, they actually reached out to me and said, hey man, we're going to send you the right card. And that was really cool. Like, that's great customer service. But you can have all the great customer service in the world, and if you're putting out a product that has not been thoroughly quality checked and made sure that it functions correctly and that the D10 is dialed in to where a normal person with normal fingers can actually flip the knife, then you're pissing in the wind. It's not a good thing. They get a lot right. I will say that, consistency in production knife manufacturing is pretty hard to do. And, very few, in fact, no, I will categorically say no production knife company is putting out 100% consistent products. Your detent, tension is going to vary from knife to knife. Tolerances are going to vary from knife to knife. That's just a fact of machining, because the tooling is, getting wear, or, maybe a little bit of crud gets on the tooling when you're milling or whatever, and something happens and it's just different on that knife. Excuse me. That's just a fact of life. You're going to have some variances from knife to knife, but if you got something that's bad enough to where the knife is extremely hard to deploy, that should not make it through your quality control. It just shouldn't. And CKF is not the only manufacturer that's guilty of this. I had a Giant Mouse Ace Sonoma, which was made by Riot, and it was a complete fail out of the box. Like, I couldn't even open the blade. And I saw another YouTuber that had the exact same experience with his Ace Sonoma. Just a complete fail. I could not deploy the blade at all. I ended up beating that knife up and trying to fix it and just selling it for like a fraction of what I paid for it, because I was so frustrated with it. I was like, I'm over this knife, just forget it. I made the detent work, although it wasn't perfect. I beat it up and said, hey man, here's what I did to it. This is why I did it. Here's this massive discount. Take the thing off my hands. And somebody jumped on it real quick. And so, that's the kind of thing that leaves a really, really bad taste in a customer's mouth. You don't want to sell somebody a $300 knife and then they can't even use the knife. They hate it so much that they can't freaking use it. So that's, my big thing with, the quality control at CKF is just it's not that great. And I wish they would make it a little better. I love CKF. Mike's a great guy. I've talked to him on numerous occasions. He's been helpful. Their customer service is good, and they put out awesome products, but quality control just not that great. Now, back to the knife. I fixed the action here. As you can see, it's pretty decent now. I shouldn't have had to fix the action, but it is what it is. I bought this knife on the secondhand market, and the guy that had it did not use it or carry it, so this was pretty much in factory condition. Let me show you what you get with this Meta here. You get your card, and you can see the serial number and the date of manufacture there was back in 2020, and the designer is Anton Melashev. And speaking of Melashev, he has put out some pretty cool knives through CKF. He's a designer mostly. I think he does customs too, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But he's a pretty good designer. He has done some pretty cool designs with CKF. And one of them was called the Baugi, which was an older model from quite a few years back. And this, really has some, it's really reminiscent of the Baugi in certain ways, although it's a slimmer profile. It has that Melashev design language for sure. So you get that. You're going to get stickers, fridge magnet. This is apparently some Russian money here that came in the bag. I don't know if that's a thing that CKF does, or if somebody who sent this from Russia put this in there, but it looks like some Russian money to me. So that's kind of cool. And then you get an extra pocket clip and a complete set of screws for the knife here. And then you get a CKF chocolate bar That's an old thing they used to do that they don't seem to be doing anymore. And you get another complete set of screws. So there's literally 2 complete sets of screws in here and a spare pocket clip. Now this is a thing that CKF always does, where they, give you all this spare hardware because the knives are limited production, and if you lose some hardware or something breaks, they want you to be able to fix your knife at least once. And so that's why they do that, because they're so limited production run, 300 units. And if something breaks 2 years down the road for you, they don't have anything in stock to fix that anymore, so they can't fix it for you. So they want you to be able to fix it yourself to some degree, and they give you that spare hardware, which is pretty cool. However, what's unusual about this one is that there are a few things missing here that typically do come with the with most CKFs. You don't have any bearings. There's not any spare bearings in this packaging, and there is no spare lock bar insert. So usually you would get those things with almost every CKF I've ever bought. You would get a spare set of bearings and a spare lock bar insert, but they are not included with this particular knife for whatever reason. So there's that. And of course you get your little cloth, and there's another, looks like a sticker, I guess. Another cool sticker in there. Yeah, so they stuff all of these things into the bag with the knife, which is totally awesome. I love all the swag that come with CKF knives, and I think that's a very cool thing that they do. I do believe that they need to step up their quality control in a big way, because I've just had way too many CKF knives with quality control issues over the years. I've been collecting knives now for roughly 7 years. I've had a lot of CKFs, and I've had a lot of quality control issues with CKFs. So, I just wanted to put that out there for Mike and people to, take into consideration that, I know that, these things are cut in China somewhere, and then CKF assembles them in Russia. So they're not milling these parts. So there's not much they can do to control a milling thing. But a lock bar tuning, that is something that you can do. It's a little bit of time out of your day to make sure that that lock bar is tuned correctly to make the knife have good action. That's something that should just be really, really well, looked after. A properly tuned lock bar and detent are absolutely paramount to customer satisfaction. If you don't get that one thing right, then it's going to completely ruin the whole rest of the knife. Because this is a pretty dang nice knife. I mean, this is a good carry. It's slim, it's light, it's got a lot of blade, it's got a lot of belly, good blade shape, good ergos, and not overly ornate, just plain Jane user status EDC knife, which is what they're going for with the MKAD line of knives. But you're completely just destroyed the knife for me because it didn't come out of the box with a good detent. Or in this case, if it was going to come with that really stiff detent, it should have had enough flipper tab for me to be able to get a hold of and deploy the knife, because this is really bad. That's almost not even a flipper tab. It's just a little freaking nub sticking up there. So yeah, anyways, on to the next review, guys. I got some more stuff coming your way over the next week or two. Several reviews coming up, actually. Have a good one. Later.